This is The Guardian.
Hello and welcome to The Guardian Football Weekly. Is the Tuchel honeymoon over? Was there ever a honeymoon? England concede their first goals and their first defeat under their new manager in what's been a pretty insipid international camp. Did we play 4-4-2? That feels very 80s or 90s. Whatever it was, it didn't really work. Things might have been different if Anthony Gordon had put England 2 up, but he didn't, and then Senegal took over. Their goals look preventable, but is the shirt starting to, cliche alert, weigh heavily again? Where is Sir Gareth and his handbrake? Also today, Ellis James voice note incoming after an incredible comeback, then late heartbreak in Belgium, and wins for Scotland and Northern Ireland. We'll talk Pep speaking out over Gaza and some interesting Man City transfer business as the mini Club World Cup transfer window slams shut. All that plus your questions, and that's today's Guardian Football Weekly. On the panel today, Barry Glendenning, hello.
Hello, Max.
Good morning, Nedum Onuoha.
Morning, sir.
And welcome, John Brewin.
Good morning.
Andy says, is it the cricket season yet? Petey says, does Barry think Tuchel will make it to the end of the Club World Cup? Yes, England 1, Senegal 3, a crescendo of boos at the City ground. Ahead of the game, Thomas Tuchel said he wanted England to play with a smile. Barry, did you watch with a smile?
Not really. I can't get past the fact that it's a friendly and therefore it doesn't really matter. But if I was an England fan, I would be concerned about those two performances. Thomas Tuchel has signed up for 18 months. You ask if the honeymoon's over. It's very much an arranged marriage that's going to end quickly in divorce, one way or the other. And I think the honeymoon is very much over. Excuses were made for England for that awful performance against Andorra. They're tired. Andorra were playing a very low block and it's hard to break through that. But Senegal didn't play a low block. They took the game to England and were much better at it than England were. I think they were more than worthy winners. They were more cohesive. They were quicker. They were incisive. They were hungrier. And England looked very nervy and passive going forward. No creativity there to speak of. They were a mess at the back, a real shambles. And because this is quite early in Thomas Tuchel, I keep being about to call him Thomas Frank, Thomas Tuchel's reign, you would think these players should be running through brick walls in their efforts to impress them. But a lot of them look very disinterested or even bored. And almost as if these games are beneath them. Now, I don't know if that's genuine attitude or if it is the weight of the shirt and they just get paralysed with terror every time they put on this magical garment. I just don't know. But yeah, that's my read on the two games I've just seen.
As Barry said, Nathan, there, like Senegal, I mean, they looked like they wanted it more. They certainly, I thought, were the better team. The first African side to ever beat England. I mean, you've covered a lot of African football. I don't want to overstate what beating England means, but I wonder sort of historically for Senegal how big that is.
I think it's not only just big for Senegal, as you say, it's big for the continent. I think as you saw that third goal go in yesterday, like they're running down the touchline in a friendly game. You know, friendly games that we don't, we tend not to see too many friendly games in general these days. So you can see how much that means to them. And I think from the England perspective, you can play it down, say it's the end of the season, it's this, there were changes and so on and so forth. But a game of football is always going to be an important game of football for whomever's playing. For those players, you can see it meant everything. What it means to the people that had the chance to witness that at the City ground, the ones who'd be watching from home or around the world. Like, it's a huge moment. I think in my mind as well, I think it's the 16th time that England have played against an African side. And in my mind, I just thought it would have been more. But then you think, well, when was the last time they played against the African side? And to be honest, I couldn't tell you. So it's hugely significant. And for some of those players, they've played in England, they've played in Europe and so on. So these are sort of familiar faces that they're going up against. But to be able to do that as a national side is huge. Mm-hmm. The belief is certainly going to be there. When you look at, say, Senegal, I think they're on a good run as well. I think they're unbeaten in 10 plus games or something. They're in a good space. And we saw yesterday, if you could watch the game beyond just through the lens of like how England are doing, you saw a very good Senegal side, a good Senegal side that, competes at the top level within African football, competes and wants to compete on the national stage as well. I was very, very impressed by them. Obviously, the England side of things is different, But I think also as well from the England perspective, as players sometimes you try and seem quite cool, calm and composed, but then the way that Senegal played against them didn't allow them to be that. And I think when you look at some of the faces that are in that England side who aren't necessarily going to be regulars or people who maybe we don't expect to start next year, like, is that going to be the starting 11? Potentially not. It's almost like you want to show something. But again, that something wasn't what was required in this game in itself. And I think some of the mistakes that we saw for some of the goals came from people who, haven't got a long-standing relationship in terms of understanding how to work together in any particular moment. And again, I love the fact that Senegal just took it to them, because then you have that gut check. Are you going to be able to handle this? And for England on the day, they absolutely did not. As I say, all credit goes to Senegal, in my opinion. And I think from the England perspective, Tuchel's going to walk away. And to be fair, I've got to say, pretty much all those players are going to be walking away and saying, now this season's finally over. Let's have a break and get ready for the next one. And I know that's the case for some of the Senegalese players as well. But, it's a friendly game at the start of June in a season that many began back at the start of July. Oh, in fact, no, it didn't, because it was Euros last year, wasn't it? So this season's basically never ended. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they'll just have to scrub this one off and have it as a good reminder, and hopefully they've done enough to get another chance under the new manager.
And bring on the Club World Cup, of course, for those players. We have to go straight to that.
We go again, yes.
Did England play 4-4-2, as producer Joel says, 4-4-2 call? I mean, I wasn't quite sure.
Well, yeah, I mean that was the sort of heart of the Ivan Toney debate, which is that Thomas Tuchel talking afterwards talked about he wanted this sort of fluid forward, didn't he, in attack. That was rather than playing a centre forward when Harry Kane came off, brought on Morgan Rogers. It did look that way. I think one of the issues is that Thomas Tuchel is getting used to international management when we know he's a manager of fairly complicated stratagems. And, you try and get players to follow instructions and it takes time and you don't have time. But, I mean, actually, Nedum mentioned the fact that last time England played an African team, I think it was actually Senegal.
Was it Senegal in Qatar, was it?
Yeah, the 2022 World Cup. Now, the scorers were Jordan Henderson, Harry Kane and Bukayo Saka. Now, whatever happened to those guys? With Thomas Tuchel, I'm getting a sort of post-1990 vibe from England. This Graham Taylor thing. Now, Graham Taylor compared to Thomas Tuchel, quite different coaches, quite different individuals, of course. But you inherit a team where the best players are sort of exhausted. Yeah. Like, think of who's the best central defender. Nedum will have more expertise on this, but you probably think it's John Stones, right? Or someone like that. John Stones is a player who isn't really available, is probably giving his best. In midfield, someone like Jordan Henderson has given his best. You've got players, even someone like Declan Rice, that's given their all. You've got Harry Kane towards the end of his career. And Thomas Tuchel is asked to refresh this team with a lot of youngsters, and there's a lot of promising youngsters, but it's not that easy. Say someone look at like Miles Lewis-Skelly. None of us here doubt the guy's talent, of course not. But we wonder, can he play in that position? Is he disciplined enough to play in that position? What happens to, say, does Lewis Hall need to come in or something like that? And all those questions are being asked. Thomas Tuchel is having to do it on the fly. Meanwhile, he's been asked questions about, is the England shirt weighing too heavy? He comes up against a Senegalese team that is both good and motivated. And he was talking, actually, wasn't he, about how he's in the dressing room and the Senegalese players are going mental in celebrating and all that, as they should do. And it was almost like England and Senegal came at that game with different objectives and different level of competitiveness. And that says, right, it's what's going to happen in a game like that. Senegal wanted to win that game. England were just, we're just testing things out mode. You can't really do that, can you? You can't get away with it.
I feel this game brings a close to this sort of like funny stage of Tuchel's tenureship, because going into the next season, you'll have not just a manager, but a bunch of players that will do everything they can to be ready and successful next summer. So as this new season begins in the September, October, November international windows, that those players will be doing everything they can to make sure that there's no doubt that they should be there to get a chance to play at the World Cup for their nation. We won't just see this with England, we'll see this all across the board. And obviously the qualifiers will form a big part of that. But it is a sense of seriousness to where if you were to speak to Tuchel after games, I think he'll be a lot more decisive in terms of what he says he likes and what he does not like. And we'll start to see who they really are. Because again, to talk about that game yesterday, like it was good to see England travelling around the country. It's good to see them, playing somewhere like the City Ground. But then it's like this weird position where people say they don't like friendlies, but then also they overreact to friendlies at the same time. All that stuff goes in the bin going forward because the scale of the task, is very much apparent now, and they'll be judged differently, I feel.
But Nedum, do you think, because we talked about this the other day, do you think because he's here for a short term, this arranged marriage, go and win the World Cup. So he's not thinking about the future. But he's picking people like Jordan Henderson and Kyle Walker. They don't necessarily feel like the right players. I know they're old, so you don't have to worry about, that is actively not thinking about the future. But do you think he is picking the right people? Or do you think the squad will be massively different? In which case, why is he picking them now?
So that's a good question. And I think
Thank you so much.
No, listen, it's been rare, but you've done it. I think it's about, I think for Tuchel, it's about seeing that group of players and how they sort of combine together. Because as they go to the World Cup next year, if you had, say, I think it's a squad of 25, 26, if you had that many people without people who've experienced it, that haven't experienced it before, then it could be bumps along the way, which maybe they don't know how to navigate. Because we know that talent-wise, England have a ton of it, and some of it's really, really young. But would you feel comfortable and confident that they'd have more of a chance of winning a World Cup without some level of experience there? And I think for those players who are on the older side, knowing this is their last tournament, potentially, I'd imagine they'd really want to go out on a high note as well. And yes, we're talking about Kyle, we're talking about Jordan, people who maybe have had some of their best years behind them, but these people can still be of huge influence. Like John just mentioned there, Miles Lewis-Skelly, is supreme talent, but then also some of these moments are different. Like for their second goal, the decision making there is coming from somebody who is 18 and essentially isn't a full-time left back. This is a midfielder. So you need people to be able to help them understand like what to do in these moments. And sometimes at that stage, you can't really fall into youngsters having discussions about what they should and shouldn't be doing. You need somebody that knows definitively what's going to happen. So I think for Tuchel's understanding, he'll know the value of experience. And I think if he can bring players on board who don't necessarily expect to play every single game, as long as they're not performing, if they're performing to their absolute best and they're the obvious option, then great. But I think these guys understand the role. They understand what the value could be for them winning a World Cup for England for the first time, I don't know, probably half the nation's lifetime. So I get it. Maybe it'll change over time, but I think anybody that's going to be there next summer will also need to be playing well. And I think some of the older guys.
Are you in a WhatsApp group with both of them? No,
absolutely not. No,
okay.
They're like, you're calling them old, and I'm older than them, so I can't really say too much. At least they're still active and successful. I've got nothing to do with that.
Well, they're definitely old. They're definitely younger than us. Look, Gibbs White was good when he came on. Barry, you're a big fan.
I am, yeah. And he came on. He tried to make things happen. Further to our conversation on Monday when we were talking about people who would be better off playing in the Henderson role than Henderson, we left out Adam Wharton, who you're a big fan of. That was
of course.
I thought of it afterwards, like, oh, dope. But yeah, I am a big fan of Morgan Gibbs-White. I don't know if he will start for England. He may not have as good a season next campaign as he did this season. Areas of concern, I would say. More petulance from Jude Bellingham, who does seem to be developing a bit of an attitude problem. I think maybe I've commented on this before. It looks like he might be getting a bit too big for his boots. I thought Dean Henderson played well as well, even though he let that one in through his legs. But he was pretty decent. I think he could give Pickford a run for his money when it comes to first choice goalkeeper.
I suppose for Gibbs White, by the end of the summer, if Nottingham Forest keep pushing us out, they're probably in the Champions League by the time they've sent enough letters to UEFA. We'll get to that. Do you think Ivan Toney had a good time, John, coming back for this?
I was watching him on the bench, and someone was telling me that they think that Tuchel is a bit annoyed how much he's asked about Ivan Toney, one of the chaps in the camp, but because it's become this...
Which would just make you ask him about him all the time, wouldn't it? Just be like, just one more, Thomas.
And you know what? They do. And I was listening to the press conference from last night, and I think he got asked about Toney at least two times. It might even have been three. Because I suppose being English, we have the obsession with the centre forward, and we have Harry Kane. We know all about that. But who's going to be the support centre forward? And of course, Ivan Toney has this sort of... Well, we don't know much about Ivan Toney anymore because he plays in Saudi Arabia and he scored lots of goals there. And we'd like to know whether he's any good. Perhaps the one person that knows whether he's any good for his system is Thomas Tuchel, who is training this guy, and was talking about how he sees Tony as someone to come on in the last 10 minutes and, mix stuff up. But he was delayed because of the Bellingham disallowed goal and the VAR nonsense that, he was supposed to come on with 10 minutes to play, ended up coming on with after 87 and having, say, 8 minutes to impress. Now, we all know that despite Jose Mourinho once telling a press pack, of which I was one, that he could tell a player in 2 minutes whether he was
2
good.
2 minutes, that's good.
Yeah, was it 2 minutes or something like that?
I think it was 10.
It was 10. Yes, well, yeah. It was a Premier League launch event one, and he told us this at a time when I think this is when people were saying, "Why aren't you playing this De Bruyne guy and this Salah? Why don't you play them?" Oh, I've seen him play for 10 minutes; they're not good enough. But obviously, Tuchel has a similar view to Tony, and he sees him as some pinch hitter type of guy. Ivan Toney himself has spoken, I believe, about this, saying, "Hey, listen, I can offer a lot more." Why wouldn't he say that? But Ivan Toney, if we know anything about Thomas Tuchel, may have to settle for that role if he wants to play for England, because Tuchel is fairly single-minded.
Question for the panel and just wider audience as such. Like, when it comes down to Ivan Toney, so the issue is the Saudi Arabia thing,
yes,
not anything else. Okay. And do you think we share the same view as other nations around the world and in Europe, that because you're playing there, clearly you're not functional anymore? Or is it just like a general thought? Because I looked at, say, in that same game, you've got Edouard Mendy and Koulibaly like playing for Senegal and being, really important for their sides. But I don't know, again, how much we've seen of their teams. And I know he's the outlier in a very extreme manner, but Roberto Martinez is still picking Cristiano Ronaldo at 55 years old or whatever he is now, playing in said league. So is it us having a perception that because you're there, clearly you're no good anymore? Or is it valid that you're not good anymore because you're playing there?
Well, I don't think the Saudi Arabia factor is the only thing with Ivan Toney. I think whether it's deserved or not, and I have no idea whether it's deserved or not, Ivan Toney has a reputation for being difficult, and maybe Tuchel wanted to see him in a squad environment to see if that's the case. I also think it's an undeniable fact. Ivan Toney takes a great penalty. He does not miss penalties. He's a good fella to have there if you're ticking down, the clock's ticking down towards a penalty shootout. Bring him on. So I don't think so. I definitely think Saudi Arabia is a factor, and that Premier League fans tend to be very dismissive of it without ever watching it. And I'm certainly one of those people. But I don't think it's the only factor where Tony's concerned.
Do you think it depends what position you play? I'm just wondering if, if your role is to come on for the last 15 minutes and, be a handful up top, which he was in the last tournament, wasn't he, Tony? Came on, made a big difference.
Yes, he was, yeah.
That's slightly different to if you're playing, centre mid. I mean, I don't know. I'm just speculating or not.
Well, the thing is, I suppose one of the things is we don't know the value of goals in the Saudi Arabian League, do we? That's one of the things that they might be worth the same as Premier League goals, or they might be,
They might be like Dutch goals, 5-1.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. What was the guy that Middlesbrough signed?
I was thinking of Vincent Janssen, but yeah, the same
well,
vibe.
Big Vinny Jansen's a good example.
Yeah,
Afonso Alves, who rattled in, and you just don't know what those goals are worth, and that may be, and also that's the fascination amongst the press pack, isn't it? Because the Saudi Arabian League holds a certain edge of mystery, doesn't it? It is this sort of city of gold that we don't know how good the football is. And we've seen Ronaldo. Ronaldo seems to be better at 40 than he was at 35. So who knows? Who knows what goes on there?
The Saudi Arabian Pro League thing is interesting because, as I'm with you, it's a real mystery, but it's like a mystery as if we can't access to see what it looks like. You know what I mean? It's so daft, and also
it's a mystery of laziness, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a mystery
100%.
I just can't
even
else.
begin to think where to see how to watch this.
I cannot be asked to tune into DAZN.
Yeah.
You made a good point there because you were talking about Ronaldo being better at 40, and it reminds me in some ways of Tom Brady's NFL career, where he could split it in 3, and it's 3 Hall of Fame careers where he's done way more than everybody else, and Ronaldo's still doing it. I mean, it's a bit of a shambles, really, isn't it? He shouldn't be that good and be that effective at that age.
But he is. I maintain, like a lot of our panelists, Portugal would spread their wings if he wasn't there. But
well, Nations League champions. You know what I mean? How far can you spread them? You can only win what's in front of you. Eh?
Don't come at me, Ronaldo fans.
Oh, good luck. Go get him.
I've experienced that before. Nice to see the City ground. And the Chalobahs become the third set of brothers to represent England post-war after the Charltons and the Nevilles. And I had forgotten that Nathaniel Chalobah played once for England in 2018.
Gareth Southgate had a big faith. He really thought Nathaniel Chalobah was going to be the one, didn't he? But unfortunately, injuries, I think, probably got in the way of that, didn't it? But there you go.
Anyway, that'll do for part one. Part two will begin with an Ellis James voice note. Welcome to part two of the Guardian Football Weeklies. An amazing game in Belgium. Belgium were 3-0 up. Wales brought it back to 3-3. Belgium with a last-minute winner from Kevin De Bruyne. Nick says, oh my word, it's going to be an Ellis James voice note for the ages tonight. And here it is.
Hello, Max. I actually recorded one of these voice notes straight after the game. I listened to it back. Max, it was incoherent. It made little to no sense. So this is a second take. Let's start with the headlines. Belgium 4, Wales 3. What a breathless, mesmerising game of football. We were 3-0 down after 27 minutes, an extremely chastening, humbling half hour. It was Bellamy's 10th game in charge, unbeaten in his first 9. So it's his first defeat, always going to happen, obviously. Although that said, when you haven't lost for 9 games and you love your manager and your manager appears incredibly wise in his sort of press conferences and post-match interviews, etc., and 4,500 Wales fans are in the away end and you walk into the ground and there's Welsh people everywhere, a small part of me thought, maybe it's different. Maybe we don't lose now. Maybe every single thing I've ever wanted is actually going to come true and I'm going to live this tremendously charmed life. Maybe we just win all the time. We're the Rafael Nadal of football somehow. But no, we lost 4-3. I'm not going to labour this or dwell on this point because it does make me sound like I played sort of football in the GM Vauxhall conference in the late 80s. The penalty, Belgium's first goal, which obviously changed the game. I mean, Brennan Johnson, his arm is behind him. If his arm is there, well, if that's a penalty, how are you meant to defend in the box? What are you meant to be doing in the box? I mean, I don't want to use phrases like going to hell in a handcart or the game's gone, but come on, it's extremely harsh. That said, Belgium were by far the better side in the first 30 minutes. De Bruyne was superb. Doku, crikey Moses. I mean, the guy... Bellamy'd coached him as a kid. And I thought to myself, maybe he's got some secret. But he said in one of his pre-match interviews, he said, no, that guy would lose you in a phone box. And, I mean, he was sensational. Obviously, then we're 3-0 down. Now, Bellamy didn't make enormous tactical changes after half-time. We were allowed back into the game because there was a penalty on the stroke of half-time. Harry Wilson scored to make it 3-1. And then we just had our tails up. And as I said, Bellamy didn't make enormous tactical changes, but large periods of the second half, we were the better side. At points, we were absolutely brilliant. And to make it 3-3, I mean, it was absolute chaos in the Wales end. And if we'd held on for a point, that would have gone down in the pantheon of really, well, I mean, it would have been better than some of our greatest victories, I think. I don't think we'd ever come back from 3-0 down away to draw or win a game. But yeah, it was just very, very exciting. Obviously, it's tremendously disappointing that we've lost. Harry Wilson was great. Sorba Thomas was fantastic. So Stoke have got themselves a really good player there. Wilson, in particular, has got real main character energy. He was all over the place, and he just looks dangerous every time he's on the ball. But the exciting thing for me, I think, is just that there's such a buzz around the side. Like, there were 4,500 Wales fans out there last night. I was talking to loads of people. They're all going to Kazakhstan. it's 3,500 miles away. It's too far. But that's the sort of, there's this just big momentum shift in Welsh football at the moment, and I'm loving it. That said, I think I'm the real hero last night because I got a very early Eurostar back because I was playing football at 1:30. I was playing five-a-side because I #love the game.
And Ellis very proud that he is off to play football, and he is an athlete. He's sort of, worryingly ripped for a comedian. I don't think comedians should be in good shape, if you want my opinion. Anyway, look, I think Baz Ellis has summed that up pretty well. The winner does feel like a huge moment for that group. As we said on Monday, if Wales could have got a point or even better, it put them in such a great position.
Yeah, and from a moment of where it looked like all hope was lost, they got it back level, should have got a point. Belgium scored, had a goal disallowed, somewhat dubiously, I think, and they got away with that. And then they let in a really soft winner. So reasons to be cheerful with that performance, and also reasons to be sad because it could prove very costly. I personally would have preferred to have heard Ellis's first version.
Yes, me too. Yes, at least the incoherent one. I agree.
Because a lot of Brits go to Belgium and make the critical error of not checking the volume of alcohol in their beverage of choice, and it can end badly. He spoke of the scenes that greeted Wales' third goal. Remarkably, one Wales fan actually fell out of the top tier of the stand when that goal went in and escaped unscathed.
Just carried on celebrating.
Well, no, he was taken to hospital but released soon after with very minor injuries. Lucky boy. The refereeing in this game was atrocious. It was a really brilliant game to watch, but the refereeing was atrocious. There were so many interminable VAR checks. As Ellis said, Belgium's first penalty shouldn't have been given. There were a couple of other iffy decisions, at least one of which went in Wales's favour. No, two went in Wales's favour, I think. But good performance, and shouldn't have lost in the end, but they did. They will look forward to getting Belgium back to Cardiff, I'd say. They'll fancy their chances.
I was going to say that Kevin De Bruyne, he looks good, doesn't he?
In regards to De Bruyne for the last 18 months at Man City, people have been speaking about him like he's the same age as Ronaldo. And then for perspective, you realise he's the same age as like a Mo Salah. So yes, he might not have been at his absolute best, but there's still plenty in the tank. And I think the way he played for Belgium the other day was one showing. But also, the way Jeremy Doku played as well, I was thinking, oh my goodness gracious me. He could get past anyone he wanted whenever he fancied it. But yeah, it's a tough loss for Wales. And I just hope from their perspective, because sometimes you're guilty of this within football, and you could arguably say life as well. You see something the first time, and you think, tell you what, I'm going to get them the next time. Then the next time comes and they've changed as well, and you find yourself in the same position. So yeah, let's not go too big on believing that they're definitely going to get a result back in Wales. They'll have a good chance, but it's still a very, very good Belgium side. And also, final point, the VAR checks were really, really long. But when you get them right in your favour, I swear, time is no factor. Take as long as you need. Was the case with that disallowed goal. No, Craig Bellamy's on the side, adamant. Yeah. And it's funny because looking at him as a former teammate, I know how worked up he would have been from when it initially happened. He's getting so angry. Then it's confirmed. So, yeah, of course. 20 minutes later. But, unfortunately, it just wasn't going to be.
Scotland won 4-0 in Liechtenstein. Barry, a hat-trick for Che Adams.
Yeah, and I think that makes it 4 goals in 21 appearances for him now, 3 of them against Liechtenstein. We spoke about the Scottish goalkeepers. Ross Doohan was in goal for Scotland after cutting short a family holiday to Turkey to play in this game. I'll be honest, he could have been named in the starting lineup. He could have stayed in Turkey. It wouldn't have made any difference. And it would have been the easiest cap anyone had ever earned. But, Scotland gave debuts to 5 or 6 players, I think. Lennon Miller was quite impressive, and there's not a huge amount you can read into this result. Steve Clarke was, I would say, quite unhappy about. He was still stewing over the result against Iceland when he spoke after this game.
If you'd have said Steve Clarke was overjoyed, I would have been very surprised, because he's never been he's never been overjoyed. That's
Speaking of Iceland, Baz, they lost 1-0 in Northern Ireland, didn't they?
So Northern Ireland haven't started the World Cup qualifiers yet. They're in a group with Germany, Slovakia, Luxembourg. Presentation before this game for Stephen Davis and Johnny Evans, who've both retired from international duty. They must have about 1,000 caps between them, you'd think. Isaac Price, the West Brom midfielder, scored his 9th goal for Northern Ireland with a nice curl shot from outside the box. Ronan Hale made his debut and was quite impressive. And Northern Ireland finished the game last 30 minutes with 10 men and held on. There was good Sunderland representation in this game. Trey Hume and Dan Ballard combined at one stage. Ballard put a header narrowly wide. But good win for Northern Ireland.
Up the Mackems. Can I ask a question to the group again? Sorry, I'm asking all these questions. Max, I'm not trying to take your job.
You've already established that Max doesn't ask many good ones.
Yeah, it's true.
Hey, it's meant to be a conversation. Let it take it wherever you want to take
isn't it? This I hope this question ends up being okay. But when I was watching the Belgium game, it was interesting watching Lukaku playing. And did you know his goal record for Belgium? Because this is in relation,
ludicrous, isn't it?
This is relates to something you said, John. So he's got 89 goals in 124 games for Belgium, yeah. And Harry Kane is on 73 and 107. You mentioned before about what's the value of those goals scored in the Netherlands. Like, why is it such a different conversation between like Lukaku and Kane when, relatively speaking, their goal records for their international sides on the same continent is either comparable or actually favours Lukaku? Like, he's almost perceived to not be this great goal scorer. How does that work on the international stage?
It depends on what country you're in with your perspective on Lukaku, because in this country we think of Lukaku as a player who was very, very talented and never quite made it. Yet in Italy, he is the key to a couple of championship wins under Antonio Conte, and whenever we turn up at a tournament, he appears to be the main man. Now, there was it the last tournament where he was quite poor? Was that right? Where he was missing a load, and everyone just says, "Oh yeah, that's just Lukaku."
Do you mean like Harry Kane was as well?
But the Manchester, and also there is the curse of Manchester United to throw into the mix. Of course, I actually thought he was okay for United. Yeah,
Barry would probably put them both in the big game bottler camp.
No, I'm a huge Romelu Lukaku fan. I've liked him since the days he was on loan at West Brom.
No, I agree with you, but there are big games. I'm just thinking, that Champions League final for Inter against City. That is. I mean, I'm basing it all on that. So maybe he's not bottled other big games.
Do you remember that there was the CBS thing with him and Thierry Henry before that? I think after the semi-final, and it was they did this whole thing because I think him and Henry are quite good friends, aren't they? And they were talking, and it was like This time I've cracked it. This time I really am going to deliver on the bigger, one of those sort of fateful interviews where
no.
And it just didn't come through for him. But I don't. I'm listening. Lukaku is one of those eternal figures. He's been around forever, and he always seems to score goals for Belgium. He always seems to be good in Italy. He always seems to be a link with a move back to England, where you think that probably won't work out.
Yeah, I wonder, Nedum, if the point is actually more the value of international goals when so many of them are scored against, teams playing a low block or, like that. You sort of have to, it's like when you look at...
Would that not be the case for Belgium playing around Europe though as well?
Yeah, case for both, I'm sure. I mean, I don't have it in front of me of who they've scored their goals against.
So, Shea Adams, flat track bully is what you're saying.
Obviously, there's no like answer to the question as such, but I'm sure most of the people listening have maybe it's a subconscious bias to think that Lukaku is not the second highest goal scorer in European football history at this national level.
Yeah. No,
just behind Ronaldo. So, well, not just behind. I think everyone's just behind Ronaldo. But again, it's just perception-wise. Because when they read the goal record out, it's always like, oh, that's really impressive. And then we just like move on straight away. He's doing it against, I don't know, Liechtenstein. Well, no, so's Harry Kane then. Isn't that the way it works?
It's a good question. So what we've got is Ronaldo shouldn't be playing.
Yeah.
Kane is a big game bottle and Lukaku's hopeless. The top three scores.
And that is today's Guardian Football Weekly. Thanks, guys.
Luxembourg 0, Ireland 0. Not much to report on the pitch, Barry, but off the pitch, sort of another nail in the coffin of basically men's football's attitude to domestic and sexual violence, I think.
Yeah, there's a cloud over Luxembourg football at the moment. Their star player is a fella called Gerson Rodriguez. and he has been convicted of domestic abuse, beating up his girlfriend, a lady called Emily Bolan, a TV presenter. He was picked to play against Slovenia at the weekend, and there were protests by Luxembourg fans who unfurled banners, and then the banners were confiscated in what seems to have been a quite heavy-handed manner. And then in the build-up to this game, journalists from the Irish Independent repeatedly asked the Luxembourg coach, who is a fellow called Luke Holtz, about the decision to pick Rodriguez and what it said about Luxembourg football's attitude towards domestic violence. And Holtz more or less refused to answer the question, and someone from the Luxembourg FA fielded all those questions. And he said, it's not for the public or the journalists or you to give him a second punishment. He has been punished by the courts. Holtz, I think, did eventually mumble an answer when he was pressed and said more or less the same thing. But there seems to be, I think a lot of Luxembourg fans understandably don't want him anywhere near the national team. And there seems to be a school of thought that if he was not as good as he is, he would be banned for the Luxembourg team. The victim of his abuse, she posted on social media, atting Luke Holtz, the manager, going, what if this was your daughter? And it was a picture of her with a very swollen face, the result of his beating.
Yeah, it's a very pertinent question. He was found guilty of 3 counts of assault battery in March of this year, had an 18-month suspended prison sentence, €1,500 fine, also ordered to pay €2,500 in damages. The Luxembourg FA said that an ethics committee would look into the circumstances surrounding Rodriguez's inclusion. And that quote from the manager, you say, Luke Holtz, we live in a democracy. Everyone has the right to their opinion. I do not feel empowered to judge Gerson Rodriguez. That is the role of a judge. Other business, I watched the highlights of Faroe Islands, Gibraltar, just to feel like Paul Watson. And Gibraltar were a goal up, and it looked very excited for them. I think they're worse than the Faroe Islands. This is where I don't become Paul Watson, who could tell us that this was actually, could have been a massive upset. I don't know, but the Faroe Islands won it in the end. Spalletti's final game in Italy was a pretty tedious 2-0 win over Moldova. Australia beat Saudi Arabia 2-1 to confirm their place at the World Cup next year. Many congratulations to our Australian listeners. Only the second time Australia and New Zealand have qualified for the same World Cup. So hopefully New Zealand get to do another DVD. They've got three draws in the 2014. I can't remember. We talked about it before.
2010 it was, yeah.
2010, undefeated or something. It's an amazing.
One of my close friends lived in New Zealand and posted on social media at the time. It's like, just because you didn't lose doesn't mean you won it, because everyone was just, oh yeah, we were the best team at that tournament because they didn't, because it's just rugby, they don't understand soccer. Fair enough. When you mentioned Saudi Arabia there, I did notice this actually, that they are competing in this summer's CONCACAF Gold Cup. Now, how come they got an invite?
Yeah, there's always someone in that, or in the Copa America. You're getting your atlas out again, going, that's interesting. The US, meanwhile, lost 4-0 in a friendly against Switzerland yesterday, following up a 2-0 defeat to Turkey at the weekend. They'd lost to Panama in CONCACAF Nations League in March. Pochettino should stop ruling himself out of the Spurs job. And in echoes of Gio Reyna's scandal from a few years ago, Christian Pulisic's dad has got involved in US MNT business. I remember he had a podcast. I listened to an episode of his podcast. It was quite nice, really. Him and his mate chatting about sport. Has anyone been across this? I can read it out if no one else is.
Yeah, I was going to say, Leander Shea-Lakins, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Leander, who I know quite well, did quite a good piece on this on the Guardian's US site, still available on the UK site, about this, the fact that in US soccer is actually quite a small world, I think was his point.
Yeah.
That they've all known each other for generations, and this is part of the problem. It's not nepotism. It's sort of, I suppose it's like the Ewings versus the Barneses or something like that from Dallas. It's that there's warring factions in here.
It's like soccer mums, isn't it? If there was a reality show about soccer mums that would, be at it.
Competitive dads, and listen. I suppose American society is in a certain sense, in a sort of the middle classes and upwards, is set in a different way. Everything is around sports teams and clubs and stuff like that in a way that it probably isn't in the UK, and it does cause these big warfares. And it's often the case, isn't it? Like the mums and dads have bigger egos than the actual players themselves.
Landon Donovan was covering a game for Fox Sports, and he was talking about Cristiano Ronaldo and saying, "I can't help but think about our guys on vacation, not wanting to play in the Gold Cup. It's pissing me off." In response, Christian Pulisic's dad took to his private account on Instagram, posting an image of a ChatGPT response about Donovan taking a sabbatical from football in 2013. This guy is talking about commitment, Mark Pulisic wrote in The Captain. "Look in the mirror and grow a pair and call names out, or are you afraid next time you want an interview and you'll get rejected again?" And Christian Pulisic liked the post. I presume Christian was not playing as on holiday, is my only presumption from this.
Well, having seen Christian Pulisic's, or a brief extract of his documentary, I can't imagine why anyone would want to interview him, because while he may be a very nice man, he is an extraordinarily dull man.
Well, I don't want to...
Not that there's anything wrong with that. And you're welcome to at me, Pulisic Senior, if you want. I really don't care.
Oh, that seems a bit harsh. Did you want to come in, Nedum? Or are you leaving this one? Leaving this grenade?
No, let me jump on top of this one. It is. So I played with like Claudio Reyna, and you see all these like fathers involved, and it's this sort of like small world of like US soccer. But there's a belief that they should be a lot better, and they're very, very good at being outspoken in America, especially when it's to do with like alleged like patriotism. You should be doing this, you should be doing that. But then also, in my opinion, the mix is like you can't pick a US 11 that is a perfect mix of people playing domestically and those playing abroad. But then the two worlds are very, very different. So then you're disgruntled from one side if it's only the ones that play abroad, or disgruntled from the other, it's only the domestic. And the critiques can be there, but then it's obviously easy for people in MLS, for example, to be playing because they're halfway through their season. But for some others who've been playing for the year so far, playing abroad, then again, it's different. And also the story you've mentioned there, why is Christian Pulisic's dad private Instagram story being part of an article? Which is a snake that's sent out there to the world? He's trying to leave a bit, but not too much. He's trying to have a little private, little bit of discourse. And now, here we are, Guardian Football Weekly talking about this post that none of us saw. But it's all a lot. And again, for the way that they cover sport, being really, really critical of individuals from a sort of patriotic standpoint is very, very easy to do over there. And it's essentially a case of red meat in itself. But Pochettino is he's going to be feeling the heat for sure. Sorry, could you just pause for a second as well? Before you were talking about World Cup qualifying and you said Australia, New Zealand. So Iran have qualified, but there's a travel ban to America. How does that work next year?
The athletes can travel because they have a special dispensation.
Is that guaranteed?
Yeah, I think that's the case. As I understand it, most of the officials will be able to, but not all of them. And as for the fans,
yeah.
No.
It's something we talked about it yesterday. We talked about it the other day, and we will keep talking about it because it's clearly bullshit, isn't it? Like it's not on. And I would say in defence of Christian Pulisic, we don't know how fun he is in private, Barry. We've got absolutely no idea. Might be a great guy.
We have in the past been roundly condemned for our attitude towards Christian Pulisic. Yeah. Maybe that's what's...
Yeah, you're on your own with this one.
Needless dig.
Yeah, he might be wonderful.
Look, he has had a long, hard season carrying AC Milan by all accounts, so maybe he does need a break.
I was going to say that he's Milan's best player. Like he is really key to them. Very good player.
Yeah. Yes, anyway, that'll do for part 2.
So don't come at me.
Go on, Mr. Pulisic.
No, you take it.
Go after him, Mr. Pulisic. Go for him.
Sometimes in private, you can be pretty boring, Barry, is what I would say.
Oh, I'm an extraordinarily dull man.
Anyway, that'll do for part 2. We'll start with Pep in part 3. Welcome to part 3 of the Guardian Football Weekly. So Pep's been awarded an honorary degree by the University of Manchester, recognising his extraordinary contribution to the city over 9 years on and off the pitch. He used his speech to talk about Gaza. It's so painful what we see in Gaza. It hurts all my body. Let me be clear. It's not about ideology. It's not about I'm right and you're wrong. Come on, it's just about the love of life, about the care of your neighbour. Maybe we think that we can see the boys and girls of 4 years old being killed with a bomb or being killed at the hospital, which is not a hospital anymore, and think it's not our business. Yeah, fine. We can think about that. It's not our business, but be careful. The next one will be ours. The next 4 or 5-year-old kids will be ours. Sorry that I see my kids every morning since the nightmare started in Gaza, and I'm so scared. He also said he was deeply troubled by the wars in Sudan and Ukraine. And I can't speak for anyone else on this panel. I don't disagree with that message at all. It is worth pointing out, I guess, that Manchester City are owned by Abu Dhabi. There was a recent article in Al Jazeera where the UAE denied supplying Chinese-made weapons to the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, which is locked in a brutal conflict with Sudan's military government. This is from sources including the UN, the US, and NGOs that they are arming the RSF. So it's complex, Barry. And like before the pod, we were sort of saying, again, we are not necessarily designed to discuss these things in great detail, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't discuss them. And I think it was very interesting that Pep used that opportunity to make the comments that he did.
Yeah, and he seemed quite nervous while doing so. Reaction to his speech seems to have been largely positive, and I'm not surprised because I don't think he said anything that was particularly controversial. But he has been subjected to the usual brickbats. Why has he waited so long to comment? Why doesn't he care about other kids who are victims of genocide or tyranny? Oh, but he works for Man City and their owners do bad things. These comments are made as if they're gotchas for Pep, and there seem to be people out there who seem to think that unless you speak out against all atrocities, you can't speak out against any atrocity. And unless you speak out about these things all the time, you shouldn't speak out about them anytime. And I don't agree with that. And we have been very critical of Newcastle's owners, but I think you can support Newcastle without supporting what their owners do. And you can work for Manchester City without being supportive of what their owners do. I think maybe you should be, well, certainly in the case of Newcastle fans, they should be more critical of their owners. I suppose it's more difficult when you're working for these people, but I don't think Pep's going to be short of a few bob if he was handed his cards. So yeah, it is complicated, but I fully agree with everything he said.
I was going to say the alternative argument, and it isn't an argument, is that people say that Pep didn't refer to hostages and Hamas in his speech, and that didn't level out what is the heart of that conflict. But Pep asking for a conflict like that to end, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
I think from my perspective, as I listen to him speak and listen to lots of other people speak, I think firstly, what you say obviously does matter, but depending on who's perceiving you, they might decide that what you don't say is bigger. Most people that talk, they talk about not wanting to see conflict and wanting to see peace and not wanting to see unnecessary death, and they want, things to change around the world and so on. But unfortunately, people were like, well, why didn't you say this and why didn't you say that? But saying all the right things at the right time, I don't think is possible, because we've yet to see anybody be able to do it. And as a consequence, then it's almost like making a decision, well, what does this mean to you? I think from some people from one side, they might think, well, you should have mentioned this, or somebody from the other side, well, you should have said more, or someone said you should have said it earlier. But I think it takes, regardless of whatever it is, I think it takes a lot to come out and say it in itself, because we know about the complexities of, say, the world and this conflict and so on in that region, how hard it is to really say something that doesn't offend someone greatly, who from their perspective will think you're 100% incorrect in what you're saying. And I think from my side, I perceive it as somebody who believes in peace. And I think if you were to ask him, so, well, what does this mean? And talk about the hostages, I think he'll also talk from my perspective about something whereby peace is the desired outcome, and hopes that conflict doesn't need to exist. And obviously himself, myself, and millions of others, we don't have to live there in those conditions, and we don't have that history attached to it. So we see what we see, and we try and make a judgment on it without trying to upset too many people. But I think in some ways it's a good thing to start a conversation, to be able to try and express yourself more. And if he ends up losing something because of it, then I think that's something that he's willing to accept, because he mentions the fact that he's talking about his kids. And that's when it becomes relatable to people that have had kids and people who are loved ones who've, lost their lives from whichever side of any conflict that there is. So yeah, I see what he's tried to say. I understand the purpose of the messaging. and I'm not going to live and die off the details, because in reality, the bigger point is the one I think that should sort of link most of us in this world as opposed to separate us.
Moving on, Nottingham Forest obviously tried to move on from that to what is happening there, to anything really, but they've written to UEFA to raise concern about Crystal Palace's plan to partaking in the Europa League next season, arguing their Premier League rivals could be in breach of multi-club ownership rules. As we check Nottingham Forest owner or now silent partner on the pitch, silent partner, etc. The belief at Forest is there is a conflict of interest because the Palace shareholder John Textor also owns a stake in League One. Also not in League One. That would be a disappointing relegation for Lyon, wouldn't it? League club Lyon, who have provisionally qualified for the Europa League. Palace qualified for Europe after winning the FA Cup. Forest qualified for the Conference League after finishing 7th in the most recent Premier League season. Forest declined to comment when contacted by The Guardian. Football family at its finest here, John, isn't it? I mean, the brazenness of, Forest and Olympia, and Marinakis. You just think, what are you doing? I heard
this at the start of this Palace thing coming to light, and the Forest were agitating for it, and I thought, that's it. But it seems to me that the whole point is that Forest did this before a certain date and Palace didn't, and that the idea is that how could Palace have known when they were playing Millwall that they would eventually get into the Europa League? That was the final date when they could have put Textor's shares into one of those, what's it called?
Blind trust.
Blind trusts. Yeah, thank you, Barry. Yeah. How much of football these days is sort of administrative wars? It is just bonkers, isn't it? Lawyer ball has not yet reached its conclusion with the 115 charges, and then we've got this nonsense as well. It appears. And hypocrisy in football as well is open season on that. That's everything. And if that is what Forest have done, it speaks very badly of the owners and their motives. It also, the other thing is that football needs to clean its act up a bit with all this ownership stuff. Palace's ownership situation has been a bit of a problem for a couple of seasons due to the lack of power that Textor has compared to Steve Parish and the other ownership. It's come to roost. It's unfortunate, and it would be awful to deny the fans and that team European football.
If I was a Palace fan, I would definitely think if it was a bigger club, they wouldn't be
100%.
And I mean, whether I'm right or not, that is how I feel as a Palace fan. And I just think it is a real shame that any other club is trying to snaffle their way higher up. I'm not surprised, but just let them have their moment. They won the FA Cup.
When you think of the bitterness of the rivalry that has grown between Brighton and Palace over somebody throwing a cup of coffee over Alan Mullery and him throwing some loose change he had in his pocket on the ground, what on earth is the rivalry between Forest and Palace going to be like in years to come when on the back of this?
Well, Wilson's always on about Sunderland and Coventry from 1980 or something like that, and the mere mention of Coventry sets Wilson into this sort of spitting mess.
Isn't it also that if Palace were thrown out, it would be Brighton would get into the Conference League? I mean, I don't know. I mean, that would be, simultaneously an outrage and funny. But yeah, fingers crossed it will be fixed.
As my friend always says about that, it's not a derby, it's a rivalry about that one, which
I don't want to get involved with that. Talking about things to not get involved with. Anyway, look, thanks everybody. It was a great conversation, Nedum. Thanks for your questions. That makes my life much easier.
Oh, it's a pleasure. No,
good
you're
stuff.
welcome.
Don't sit in this seat when I take a holiday because I think you might be good at it. I don't want that. Not interested in that.
Listen, guys. To all the listeners, if I don't appear on this podcast again, it's because Max has cancelled me. Yeah, remember that.
Thank you, John.
I hope I don't get cancelled, but I can't say it won't happen.
Well, of course, I think John and Barry, I don't want you to feel like I'm not concerned. I don't feel threatened by either of you being there. So I just say thanks. I'll see you next time. Thank you, Barry.
I am very much one of life's sidekicks, Max. I don't want the big chair.
Don't worry. You don't have to tell us. We all know. Football Weekly is produced by Joel Grove. Our executive producer is Danielle Stevens. We'll be back tomorrow.
This is The Guardian.